Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Tim Kelly. First, a couple of announcements. Check out the brand new show created by myself. It happened May the 4th. It's a new spiritual-based show where everyone is welcome to come and listen once a week to myself and guests from all different spiritual paths. And we're going to share cosmic wisdom to learn and grow and maybe gain some new understandings. The link to that new show is right in the description. It is currently available on all podcast platforms. It will soon be available on YouTube and Rumble as well. I think many will enjoy the good news in just the first episode. You can go listen to that right now if you haven't already. The links are in the description, and may the 4th be with you all. You can watch the Forbidden documentary Occult Louisiana on Tubi and other streaming platforms. If you'd like to be a part of the film project, Doors of Perception, we're going to be traveling to Utah this summer to finish up our filming. We are having a fundraiser to help with equipment and travel expenses. If you would like to help with the donation, we have links in the description. You can visit supportfkn.com. If you'd like to help in any other way, you can email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. You can also go to rokfin.com/FKN+. You'll sign up for a premium membership. With that, you'll get access to not only all our premium content, but all the premium content from every creator on Rokfin. Finally, you can download our episodes directly through Spreaker, which is our podcast provider that is always free for you. We have links right in the description for everything. We're also booking guests for June and July. If you have suggestions or you would like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome Tim Kelly. He is founder of Polytope Press and author of Natural Healing, Self-Empowerment, Optiflex, Hidden History of Humanity, and multiple novels, including The Math Wizard, which is an attempt to resurrect the original 7-step path to enlightenment once offered in Atlantis. He also created a 3D periodic table of the elements, new theory of the origins of species, and has written articles on independent homesteads. His company is focused on actualizing every aspect of an optimal civilization. Tim, welcome. How you doing?
Thoroughly challenged, I would say. How are you?
I'm excellent, man. Thank you so much for adapting and adjusting and being here with us today. I really appreciate it. Your work is definitely what we're all about here at Forbidden Knowledge News. Hidden history, metaphysical and spiritual understandings, basically secrets of the damn universe. So, of course, this can be a lot to discuss, but before we do, introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you on your path.
When I was a very little kid, I realized quickly that my biggest love was probably writing. And so I assumed that as I would go through my life, that my life would be based on writing. I won several awards for it, won multiple awards in several fields that you could consider related to writing. For example, I was a spelling champion, speech and debate champion, and won several writing awards, science awards. And so as life went by, I was reading a great deal of books and I was winning a lot of awards. And I thought, well, great, this is all working out pretty well for me. I know what I want to do. I want to write. And so initially I was thinking I would write fiction as opposed to nonfiction. But as time went by, I was learning more and more in nonfiction. And I had a great deal of interest in the ancient past, had a great deal of interest in spirituality, and all of these currents were to merge eventually into the fiction that I was going to write. And that got me to the point where eventually I had written multiple novels and multiple books in nonfiction, including Hidden History of Humanity, The Math Wizard, which we'll talk about a little bit today, and Natural Healing, Self-Empowerment, which we'll also talk about today. And the theme behind all of my work is optimal civilization. My bolder moments, I do call it paradise on earth, because as far as I'm concerned, that's the way we should be living. Mm-hmm. And I've focused on exactly how to realize that and we will hopefully, again, be discussing that today.
We will definitely be discussing that, man, because that is everything to me. That is where my path has led me, is exactly what you were just saying. It's one of the most, if not the most important thing humanity has to become aware of and start exploring. So excited to get into this. Let's start with a synopsis of Hidden History and the Math Wizard.
Okay, so with Hidden History, I thought it was essential to understand the world that you're living in. If you want to change it for the better, you have to understand where you are to start. And I had been studying history my entire life. There was an explosion of books on the ancient past in the 90s, and I read all those books and I loved them and I appreciated them. I just wish they could have gone further. Specifically, I was tantalized by concepts of Atlantis and how Atlantis may have actually worked. And when I read through a great deal of material on Atlantis, I found it a little off. There was just something that seemed to be missing. At the same time, we seem to have a very primitive set of technology in the ancient past and incredibly sophisticated technology in the ancient past. And I wanted to resolve those issues. And in the course of doing research, I uncovered quite an unexpected story, which I will now share because I feel that for people on planet Earth, this is one of the most important stories they could possibly hear.
Yeah, man.
So eventually, I discovered that in the ancient past, it appears as if 3 demonstrable alien superpowers played a significant role in the history of the Earth. I have extensive documentation and evidence to support this. So I will go over what those 3 groups were. The first group is apparently from the Pleiades, and they stood about 10 or 12 feet tall with fair skin, blonde or gold hair, blue eyes. They founded the civilization known as Atlantis. And again, I will be getting into extensive documentation as to why I believe that is the case. There is another group, sometimes known as the Namos. They were described by the Dogon tribe of Mali. They were hermaphrodites, which I know is a very strange thing, but they were capable of self-fertilization. They had blue-green skin. My scientific work was able to correspond the evolution of cephalopods to this group, and there is also historical backing for this as well. There was a historian in ancient Egypt whose name was Manetho, and he stated that he had seen 345 effigies of the former divine rulers of Egypt who were able to reproduce without the agency of women. This is basically describing a hermaphroditic species. This is also backed up by the famous historian Herodotus, who was an initiate in a mystery school in Egypt, which gave him access to information that most people don't have access to. He stated that the traffic from what he called the sky gods began in about 17,000 BC, that Osiris appeared at approximately 15,500 BC, that the sky traffic ended at approximately 11,000 BC. And there is a third group, a reptilian group, which we see depicted in the Ubaid figurines in the Sumer area. And this would be the group that founded the Sumer civilization, although there is evidence to suggest that they were here prior to that. Now, I want to go back to Atlantis and reinforce this strongly because it's very important to the story, and it's also very inspirational, I think, in many ways. So let me just start citing more of the evidence for why the Pleiadians founded Atlantis. First of all, there is the dialogue of Plato, which many people were familiar with, but what they may not have drawn together in terms of all evidence is the origins of our particular species and how that changed over time. So first we have Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, in my research, does not exist until approximately 210,000 BC, when the Pleiadians arrive and upgrade the extant ape hominids to Homo sapiens. The next upgrade occurs at approximately 30,000 BC. This is part of the paleontological record, where Cro-Magnon man appears at approximately 30,000 BC. Now, this I tied directly to Atlantis. Specifically, Plato states that a god named Poseidon, and in this case, we're going to translate a god as a Pleiadian, mates with a mortal woman named Cleito. This leads us to 10 twins, which are named in mythology, so we know exactly what the names of these twins were. One of those twins was Atlas, after which some people believe Atlantis itself takes its name. And these were tied to 7 women, the 7 sisters, who would be known as the Pleiades. Hint, hint. Okay, so from there, we get the Cro-Magnons. And the Cro-Magnons appear again at about 30,000 BC. And we do see them tied to the remnants of Atlantis, specifically the Canary Islands and the Azores. Because if you go into those islands, you will see the Cro-Magnons were there, that you found people with blonde hair unexpectedly. These were tied to Atlantean legacy colonies that would appear in Northwest Africa. There's been a lot of talk about the Rekot structure in Mauritania. This is in Northwest Africa. That was an Atlantean legacy colony. We have the Roman sophist Elian, who is quoting an unnamed Greek historian. I found this in one of Joseph Farrell's books, who stated of Atlantis the following. It was a continent that was surrounded by water, that the people who lived there stood twice as tall and lived twice as long as other people. He also describes two major metropolises that were on that island. He states one of them was peaceful and that one of them was warlike. This, of course, is also backed up by Plato's dialogue. In the Timaeus, he talks about an invasion force that set out from one of the spots in Atlantis and tried to take over Europe and the colonies that were in the Mediterranean basin. They were defeated by the armies of an ancient Athena. And I phrase it that way for a very specific reason. But in any case, if you track all of these people, you will find that the locations where anyone who interacted with them showed up feature people with blonde hair and blue eyes. Some people had advanced technology, some didn't. It depended on who they were interacting with. The significance of the Cro-Magnon is mesocephaly, which is a new skull shape where you have a higher forebrain capacity. So it was only at about 30,000 BC that man finally had the ability to think the deeper thoughts. And in the records, we can see, and this is usually one of the biggest questions that I get, what was the advanced technology? Well, the greatest structure on planet Earth is the Great Pyramid in Egypt. And if you understand how the Great Pyramid in Egypt works in all its degrees, you will understand that you're looking directly at a form of advanced technology. So let me just describe a little bit of that technology, because that will map out for you what the Pleiadians were capable of, and it should hopefully convince you no human beings had technology along these lines. So what the Great Pyramid could do, it had multiple levels of functionality, just like any pyramid. You could design a pyramid that had a low-level functionality or an extremely high-level functionality. But at the basic level, you had a provision level. This would preserve food so that it didn't decay, and you could grow food around the clock. How could you grow food around the clock? You would do this with what's called full spectrum light. We have the capability to do this today. So inside your house, you can't necessarily grow plants with the incandescent lights that you're using to light your home. Most people are probably using incandescent lights. But if you get full spectrum lights, there's a company called Blue Max, for example, that makes full spectrum lights. You can grow plants indoors. Now, how did the Great Pyramid grow plants around the clock? I believe it was done by the limestone casing that was on the outer layer of the Great Pyramid. The great genius Nikola Tesla was able to oscillate calcium sulfide at 10,000 hertz and make it give off full spectrum phosphorescent light. So with that outer stone casing having calcium sulfide, calcite, there's a number of different names for it, you could vibrate that and give off light that would grow food around the clock. So there would be an abundance of food. I believe that the second wonder of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, is actually directly related to the Great Pyramid, because in Tony Bushby's second book, The Secret in the Bible, he shows you that the original Babylon was actually in Old Cairo. So that means that the original Babylon was in Old Cairo, so that the Hanging Gardens would have been the food grown in the light of the Great Pyramid. The second level of functionality of a Great Pyramid was as a communication device. This was done by a resonant capstone that was atop the Great Pyramid. Now, in Tesla's work, he used mass resonant copper spheres that were on top of poles to broadcast communication signals. And with mass energy equivalence, the capstone did something similar, only it used energetic resonance instead of mass resonance to broadcast communication signals. Now, when you broadcast signals like that, you always want to have a unique frequency to send your signal. Tesla had special oscillators that he did to do that, but another suppressed inventor is Royal Raymond Rife. And one of the things he did with microscopes was to show you that you could create unique frequencies by splitting light. Makes perfect sense. When you're trying to look at a small object in a microscope, you use ambient white light. So the innovation that Rife came up with is, what if we split the light? Because if we split the light, we're splitting it into its constituent frequencies, and we can increase the resolution and we can get more carrier waves if, for example, if you're designing a Great Pyramid and you want to broadcast signals. So there was that communication capability. And then finally, there was a power broadcast. This also brings us to Tesla, who is also trying to broadcast free power to all the world through this Wardenclyffe Tower. But again, this Great Pyramid would have done this through energy residence via the pyramid capstone. And believe me, there has been a ton of work, and I encourage people to check it all out for themselves. Sources include Christopher Dunn, a no-nonsense engineer who wrote a book called The Giza Power Plant, Joseph Farrell, who wrote 3 different books, the Giza Death Star Trilogy. Currently, there's an investigator by the name of Professor Gregory Herman. You can look up his work online. It's even more sophisticated than some of the other models of the Great Pyramid that we have seen. This is showing you exactly, almost schematics of how a Great Pyramid would have done everything that I'm saying it can do. Beyond that, there was a defensive capability that Nikola Tesla was also in the ballpark of. So some people believe that the 1908 Tunguska event, where it seems as if an asteroid blasted a bunch of Siberian forest and flattened trees and killed off a lot of reindeer, was actually the result of Nikola Tesla testing his technology, which the Great Pyramid 2 would have been capable of doing. Beyond that, it appears as if the Great Pyramid used plasma tech. This would be the ultimate tech. And now I've done work in health, which we may touch on later, but to understand the significance of plasma, we understand the differences of working with frequencies in different forms. For example, you can have different frequencies of sound. You can have different frequencies of electricity. Why is plasma so significant? Plasma is significant because it can penetrate through any barrier. So let's say that you need to create a superluminal communication signal to transmit an instantaneous signal to a distant star system so that the communication doesn't have a time lag. You would use plasma for that, because it's going to travel faster than light, and it will penetrate through any object in its way, including planets, asteroids, suns, stars, whatever. So this is a rough sketch of what the Pleiadians were capable of doing. They were guiding the slightly less sophisticated Cyanians, and they were constantly interfered with by a negative reptilian group that created a different civilizational model in Sumer, which I call the 3 T's of torment. This was tribute, thievery, and tithes. Basically, in Sumer, you had a new model where you had tyrants overseeing civilizations. You had gangster banking, which started in Sumer and has now spread to almost the entire planet. And you had forced donations to sun god cults. And these, to me, were intrusions. For me, if we're going to get to paradise, we do have to focus on the 10 basics of civilization, and those are in order: water, sanitation, food, shelter, power, heating, cooling, lighting, telecommunication, and transportation. If we do all of those in an optimal way, we will optimize the human species. I apologize for saying so much without pausing, but I am just going to go ahead and give you a chance to respond.
I do want to go back before we go any further into what the math wizard really means for everything. What are your thoughts on the collection of theological understandings of the creation story of man?
Definitely, and it's all covered quite extensively in Hidden History of Humanity. So in relation to the Bible specifically, and essentially the derivation of the sun god cults, everything traces back to Sumer. So we actually will be touching on part of this in the Math Wizard, but in relation to a learning plan for humanity, I look at it in the following way. I look at life as having 3 aspects: physical, mental, spiritual. I believe that all 3 of these were ideally covered in Atlantis around a great pyramid, which also existed in the Atlantean capital. So part of the way that I link Atlantis to Giza is simply by doing geodetic math. If you insert a cube into a sphere, the corners of the cube will touch the surface of the planet at 8 specific points. Giza is exactly at one of those 8 points. And if you go exactly 90 degrees west, anyone can verify this, get a map, look at it, go exactly 90 degrees west of Giza, what do you hit? The Bermuda Triangle. My research indicates that the Poseidonus, the capital of Atlantis, was once in that very spot. So in that spot, you would have had one of these 8 cities and rings. You would have had a cubical temple of learning that would teach you the path to enlightenment through a 7-step program. And the 7th step was the most spiritual of the steps. But what happens in Sumer is that an advanced civilization arrives. They understand what's going on in Egypt and they want it shut down. The greatest threat to them is the Great Pyramid and the learning program that is going on for the initiates in the Great Pyramid. Now, when Sumer decides to launch a war, this war is indirectly known to most of us in history. It's the story of Osiris, Horus, Set, and Isis. Now, that story is the story of the war to take down the Great Pyramid and strip it of its full functionality. Once that is done, a new civilization of victors ruling from Sumer has taken over the planet. And from then on, they are going to dictate the kinds of religious beliefs everyone is going to have in multiple locations. The significance of this really can't be underestimated, because what my research shows is that many religions that many people might think of as completely separate from each other are not at all separate from each other.
Right.
For example, the Hindu religion. Some people might think, okay, that was spontaneous, that was original, that has nothing to do with Sumer. All my research invalidates that. It shows that, yes, everything that happened in the Hindu religion was directly related to what I call the Reptile Cyanian War, the battle between Sumer and the forces in Egypt to take over the Giza Plateau. Once they had taken it over, I can show you direct ties between Akhenaten of the New Kingdom, a tribe of people that were living in the Levant called the Mitanni, and then the origins of the Sanskrit language, which was used to create the Itihasa, which is the collective term for the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. They were the ones who created this foundation for the Hindu religion. They used their own Sumerian-based thought process to create the Hindu religion. They did the same thing with several other religions. In Judaism, for example, some people think that the history of Judaism and the legendary Hebrew kings like Solomon and Saul and David is completely spontaneous to that region. It's not. It also ties back to ancient Egypt and the mystery schools. These people were getting almost all their information from the same spot. It was initiation into the mystery schools in Egypt. I can't tell you how many of these people that we think of as famous historical ancient figures were all initiated and got their information from the exact same spot. Pythagoras, Plato, Herodotus, the historian that I just mentioned, the first Roman emperor was initiated in the ancient mystery school in Egypt. All of these people kept getting their information from the same source, and they went out to different locations and created different versions of sun god cults. So when you look to the Bible, when you're looking at Genesis specifically, what you're looking at is an account of a reptile civilization being founded and the creation of a new hybrid species, one of many hybrid species that were created. In the Ugaritic texts, there's a reference to the Rephaim. And in these texts, it talks about the Rephaim of the earth, the Rephaim of old, and the Rephaim of the sky. And a man who's interpreting that evidence ties all of that to Sumer. And when you look at pretty much everything that is in Genesis, like, for example, let's take the Garden of Eden. The evidence shows very, very clearly that the most likely candidate for the Garden of Eden is a site called Eridu. This is related to a group called the Anunnaki, who founded the Sumerian civilization. We can trace in books like Flying Serpents and Dragons by R.A. Boulay the origins of many Bible stories. I have another scholar, Ahmed Osman, who shows you that many of the so-called Hebrew kings were actually Egyptian-based. Like, for example, King Solomon. Some people say, oh, King Solomon never existed. I know there are a number of people who are saying that. But what Osman did is he showed you the exact origins of many of these biblical figures. So he can tell you, for example, King Solomon was actually Amenhotep III. And he has an entire website devoted to breaking down where a number of those figures came from. Now, of course, later religions could be Christianity, could be Islam, take your pick. All of these are deriving back to the same source. These are the events of when Sumer was founded and a certain way of looking at life that very few religions have escaped. And, in my research, I would say just about the only religion I have not seen influenced by this group is maybe the Jains. And most people don't even know who they are.
Let's get a little bit further into the 7-step path to enlightenment that you were discussing?
So I was mentioning just a moment ago about a mystery school in Egypt. Well, after the Sumerian civilization had fought a war, which was encoded into the Mahabharata to take over the Giza Plateau, they knew that there was this program being taught to enlighten people. And they said, okay, well, we can't have that because otherwise people will rebel and they'll have their own civilization and we'll be powerless. So they stripped the program. However, in Tony Bushby's second book, The Secret in the Bible, he tells you what the gutted version of the 7-step program was. And it was roughly along these lines. Step 1, physical sciences. Step 2, geometry and architecture. Step 3, hieroglyphics. Hard to believe that the original program had hieroglyphics in it. 4 was laws. 5 was chemistry. 6 was astronomy. And 7 was final revelation. So this program was in existence in ancient Egypt. There seems to be little question about that. But I also think it's imperative to understand that the program was gutted down by people who didn't want people to have the full knowledge. So my challenge was, can I resurrect that program back to its original form? So how did I do that? Well, I used that template that I just mentioned as a foundation, and I built on it using all the knowledge I had accumulated over a lifetime. What would everyone need to know to become a fully enlightened individual? So first, let me explain enlightenment itself, because that helps. There's work that's been done on the human aura. Okay, so we all have an energy field that surrounds us, a nimbus of light. And when you look at light, it has 3 primary qualities that are usually of interest: the cleanliness or dirtiness of the light, the range of frequencies in the light, and the amplitude of the light. So imagine someone setting up a civilization where the 10 basics of civilization, which I went over, water through transportation, were set up in such a way that if you lived in that environment, the light coming off of your being was optimized. So I believe that the Atlanteans did have that set up, and I love talking about the specifics of how to set up the 10 basics of civilization the right way. We can do that if you want later. Then there's the mental steps that you would go through in the 7-step program. And I map out those 7 mental steps, the first 6 being predominantly mental, and the 6th being the spiritual final revelation step, as follows. Step 1, math and materials. Step 2, geometry and architecture. Step 3, logic and flows. Step 4, vibration and chemistry. Step 5, spectroscopy and astronomy. Step 6, music and being. Step 7, final revelation. And we do know there was, again, a gutted version of this that took place in ancient Egypt, but I look at it as largely being on the dark side at that point. So when you go through the 6 steps, you understand the following. First of all, you'll understand the building materials that are around you. So if you want to build something, anything, doesn't matter what it is, you'll understand what your building materials are in nature. You'll understand atomic structure. You'll understand how to combine things together from an engineering standpoint. So in engineering, for example, there's something called a polariscope, and there's something called birefringence. So you can put an object up, pass light through it, and see by the light patterns in the material the flow of stress in the material. And if you do that in just the right way, you can create ideal materials. And I would think that this would be kind of the thing that they would have learned in ancient times. Geometry and architecture is fairly self-explanatory. You're going to learn how to understand the flow of stresses in your house and build a house that will stand and last, and any type of building that would stand and last. In logic and flows, you're going to understand how to make water flow into your house, how to make electricity and power flow into your house. I happen to believe that the ancients were masters of etheric flow. In my research, I would suggest that Tesla, as one of my sources also agrees with me on this, had not only mastered flows of electricity, but ether. That there's a whole branch of physics that is suppressed called ether physics. Every single person who's worked in this field saw their work shut down. In vibration and chemistry, you can do things like what Dr. Hulda Clark was doing not that long ago. She invented a device called a synchrometer, which tells you that every single object, every material has a frequency. Now, what could you do with that? You could do a lot of positive stuff with that. Let's say that you wanted to purify your food supply, for example, and that there were toxins in your food supply. You apply a synchrometer to that, and you could start removing toxins. You could think of every toxin that could possibly harm a human being, test it with a synchrometer, get it out of there. Wouldn't that be helpful? And then with other aspects of vibration, you can change matter itself. This is a whole field called cymatics. I'm sure some people have seen that who watch this program. You hit objects like, for example, a medium such as sand, and you create elegant shapes. So this would be a way to structure matter, ideally. I mean, when you study metallurgy, I don't know how many people have studied metallurgy, but one of the things that's interesting in that is the grain sizes of materials. And one of the things that you see is that a better material is, the more, as I would say, affinitic it is. It is very fine grain sized. And that's what you can do with vibration. You can change the grain size, and it gives the metals different properties. There's a whole field in that right now that's called nanophase materials. I encourage people to look it up, and you can see how different grain sizes give materials different properties. From there, you would go to spectroscopy, which is the ability to determine elements that are very far away, like in a distant star, to see what other solar systems have life and what the living conditions there would be. This also puts you in a realm of what I call reluxance. So what I mean by reluxance is you can have resonance in a power system, and it drastically improves the efficiency of a power system. What if you could do that same thing with light? What if you could look at the incoming frequencies of light that come to hit this planet from the stars, design a crystal in such a way that it resonates that particular frequency? That would be a tremendous boost to your power systems, and it appears as if the ancients did that very thing. The next degree is music and being. It shows you how ideal human beings, or ideal beings of any kind, are ultimately based on musical relationships. Those musical relationships appear in their DNA, in the proportions of their body parts, and everything in existence can, in a sense, be set to music and create a sort of an ultimate harmony in the environment. This we know from the Great Pyramid, that sound values were taken from its major chambers. These all conform to a natural musical scale. And then the final step of the path, final revelation, you have an out-of-body experience. Now, that did happen in ancient Egypt. You look at the ancient carvings, you'll see certain substances that were used predominantly. You see carvings of pine cones. You see the blue lotus flower. You see the Amanita muscaria mushroom. All of these had psychotropic effects. All of these were used in ancient Egypt to trigger these out-of-body experiences and lead to a program where the body was attuned so that it would experience what's called theophany. Theophany translates as revelation of the gods. So when you went through this training program and got to the conclusion, you would have an out-of-body experience. It would send you to a realm beyond, and you would encounter firsthand beings living on other frequencies and prove to yourself that the soul was real, that this life does not end at death, and that there are beings on other frequencies, that there is a deeper point to everything.
I love that, man. Now, while we're getting to some deeper points to everything, my current understanding where I'm at now, and this goes back to the Anunnaki and what they represent, what they really were. My understanding of how creation all began is that there is a source of all. There's something you would call God that then created what some understand as the Elohim, or maybe aliens. And then through the will of this source or God, man was created through these very highly intelligent extraterrestrial or cosmic beings. And that is basically my understanding of the creation story. I'd love to get your insights into that.
So what I see in Sumer is the advent of an extremely negative civilization. And unfortunately for me, when I trace things back, I mean, we have to pay attention directly to what the most original writings were saying. In R.A. Boulay, he translates the oldest Sumerian tablet as saying, "Verily, the reptiles descend." Now, people can question whether or not he got that right. But again, we do see the Ubaid lizard figurines in that area before Sumer was founded. It's also of extreme importance, I think, to focus on the story of Noah for what it reveals to us, because I had 3 different major independent scholars all say the exact same thing. Now, if you go to the Bible and you look at Genesis and look at the story of Noah, you will see part of this story. The part that makes it make sense has been deleted from the text. But the part of the story that you will see is that people saw Noah with no shirt on, and they were afraid. Now, what's not explained is why. Why were they afraid? And what if you go back and you insert back in the text that was removed, it says that Noah had on his chest scales. And if you look at everything that was happening at that time, the species that was created at that time was not Cro-Magnon. It was not Homo sapiens sapiens. It was the Rephaim. This was a breed of giants that were related to the Anunnaki, who I show in turn were related to Cyanians. Now, let me explain specifically what I mean by that. When the Dogon of Mali were describing the Cyanians, who had been their teachers, they described them as being amphibious. They said that they had 2 legs, a tail like a fish, and elongated heads. Now, Oannes in the Middle Eastern region is apparently the Babylonian version of Enki. And if you look up links to Enki, and I have a link to the Mesopotamian god site in my material, you will see a being who has 2 legs and a fishtail. So this is showing ties that this group that was created, I would also stress, in the Babylonian records, where they were referencing the Anunnaki as a different name, Anadoti, but it's clearly, when you follow all the clues, it's the exact same reference that's taking place. They said they were repulsive abominations. So, and again, those are their words for the beings that were overseeing them. So when we have that, and we have people who are extremely fond of the phrase "God made man in His image," I don't know. Look at yourself in the mirror. Do you think of yourself as a repulsive abomination? I don't. So I think that this again was the creation of a different group. The Homo sapiens, our species, I believe, was created in Atlantis and not in Sumer. This is my opinion. I understand that people are going to disagree with me on it, but I do have a lot of evidence to back it up, including evidence that shows the insertion of Pleiadian DNA into humans, into Denmark, at about 2000 BC. And I actually can cross-reference multiple sources to explain exactly how that DNA got there, but I'll pause again.
So when it comes to what we are as modern Homo sapiens, what's your understanding of how we ended up to be this?
So I really do think that the story of Poseidon mating with Cleito is a very significant part of the story. So I do think that at approximately 30,000 BC, Poseidon, a Pleiadian, who, again, they look a lot, some people would look at ape hominids and look at Pleiadians, and they're pretty much the only species that can pass for us. So why do we look like we look like? Because we look like them. It's not so much that they look like us. We look like them because we were largely made in their image. And when Poseidon mated with Cleito, it created these 10 twins, again, who are named, the first 2 of which are Atlas and Gadir. And they were the princes of Atlantis that were described in the dialogue of Plato. This is where the Cro-Magnons, again, came from, was the continent of Atlantis. And the Cro-Magnons, who are mesocephalic, have the higher forebrain capacity, they originated in Atlantis, and they were a result of sort of the gradual dilution of Pleiadian DNA with human DNA as humans were shrinking in size over time. But the original demigods, for example, Atlas, would have been a giant because he was closer to the Pleiadian originals. But as time goes by, the Cro-Mags are shrinking in size. And this is largely where I believe we came from, because all the evidence does support it. Don't forget that the paleontological evidence shows Cro-Magnon starting at about 30,000 BC. And there's no plausible explanation for Cro-Magnon suddenly appearing out of nowhere other than this description of Atlantis, because, again, Cro-Magnon remains have been found in the Canaries and the Azores, which are remnants of Atlantis.
Going back to, if there is a source of all, do you think that there is a creator for these beings, that there is something above all?
I do happen to believe that. I write about this extensively in my fiction. I make references to 2 different things. So one, I make a reference to the One. And when I say the One, I mean all of us combined together are God. But I also make reference to what I call the transcendent, which is the aspect of us that has chosen to remain independent of reincarnational cycles and is the most ultimate positive being overseeing all of this. This is just a personal belief of my own.
I like that. So let's move a little bit forward. You also, in your talking points, talked about a 3D periodic table of elements. Tell us a little bit about that.
Happy to do so. So there are so many people who talk about what they sometimes refer to as sacred geometry. So in the 20th century, there was a genius who unfortunately was rather neglected. I think very few people even are aware of his work at this point, but his name was R. Buckminster Fuller. I
Yeah.
think the most famous reference that you would have to him would be Epcot Center,
I've
unfortunately,
actually
because
done a
of
few shows on him, so I'm very familiar.
okay, great. In his work, at one point, he decided to break away from mainstream thought and do some investigations into mathematics. This eventually resulted in two books, Synergetics 1 and Synergetics 2, published in 1975, 1979. Synergetics 2 was a series of strategic supplemented paragraphs that were inserted into, and unfortunately, shortly after that, he died. But I came across this work, and when I read it, I was intrigued by it. The foundation of synergetics involves a mapping coordinate system that is different from the conventional mapping coordinate systems. Most of us are using a Cartesian coordinate system. This is three axes at 90 degrees, the X, Y, and Z axis. Fuller proposed a six axes at 60 degrees coordinate axis system called the isotropic vector matrix grid. And then after proposing a lot of this, he generally seemed to have this very platonic outlook of this is so beautiful, it must be true, but I'll leave it to other people to figure out the connections to reality. So that left an awful lot of work for the rest of us. But the students of Buckminster Fuller started the work of connecting his geometry to the applied data of physics. And they made a number of significant steps. For example, uranium has a number of 238. Okay, so where does that number come from? If you look at a conventional model of atomic structure in a nucleus, they just have a bunch of spheres glommed together randomly, and there's no elegance in it whatsoever. It can't possibly be symmetric because all the differences inside are sloppy. So what Fuller did and what his students did was show you exactly how you get to 238. So you can use pennies from your pocket for this exercise if you want. You just take out like 7 pennies and place them on a table and then try to connect them next to each other. And you'll see that for every 1 penny, you can surround that penny only when you use 6. There's no other number that works. It's 6 and only 6. And you keep doing that, and you can do that in 3D as well. If you have a sphere and you're trying to perfectly surround the sphere, it takes 12 spheres to surround that first sphere. That next layer, if you're going to perfectly surround that, takes 42. And if you're going to surround that one, it takes 92. Now, what happens right there? You just stop. Add up the numbers, 12 plus 42 plus 92. And then you add that to another 92 for the protons, and you get 238. This gives you an exact, precise map of the atomic structure of uranium. And now when you have that, you can just keep going. So that's what I did. I kept going. And I found things that some of the students of Fuller had not found. For example, I found a way to geometrically map the noble gases. So far as I know, no one else had ever done that before. And I showed that they had hollowed out cores because their numbers matched synergetic geometry as long as you had hollowed out cores. But then I took the next major leap, which was to go to electron shells. And so far as I know, no one had touched electron shells from a synergetic standpoint. And using synergetic geometry, I was able to perfectly match the numbers of electrons in the outer electron shells to an icosahedral framework. So that brought us to what I call the grand icosahedron of the elements. So instead of what most people will call the periodic table, I call it the grand icosahedron of the elements. There is no forcing. All data matches perfectly. And what we could have done with this is unbelievable. But unfortunately, when I first shared this work with scientists around the world, I was hoping for like 30, 40% support or something like that. I got like 95% support. Oh, wow. And that shocked me. I was not at all expecting so many people to approve of the work that I had done. But then when I went to the science journals, didn't want to hear it.
Right.
They didn't. It wasn't a question of them reading the work and refuting it. They didn't even want to read it. And I was like, wow. I was talking to the editor of Nature magazine, and he was bragging about how great his magazine was. And I said to him, that's fantastic that you can brag, but if you're so good, why can't you do basic high school math to verify this theory? He had nothing to say.
Man.
So
Yeah, that just shows you where we're at with a lot of the scientific community and academia and their non-willingness to accept new ideas. But I sense that this is starting to slowly change. Do you have any other plans on presenting this in any other way?
Well, what I did is I founded my company and I immediately put up a technical paper describing the work on my website. So it's sitting there right now today for free. So anyone can read it. Anyone can try to double check the math or do whatever they want to do. It's right there. It's available free to the world. I felt that the world should see this for themselves, and then maybe reflect on some of the other articles I've written. This does appear to be a cult of scientism. This has nothing to do with the scientific method anymore. Now it's like this group of people in hoods and robes who are saying, you must say the sacred words or you're banished from our presence. And this is bizarre. I never expected anything like this when I was a kid.
Well, I am encouraged by some of the things that are unfolding with really a collective understanding of deceptions, and the way the system really works in people's minds is changing. And I'm encouraged to see the amount of people that are starting to not participate with things that don't serve humanity, which unfortunately most of our technological and scientific and even our unfortunate education system, it's all based on backwards thinking and a foundation that is rotten from the core. So I'm kind of encouraged with a lot of things that are happening right now. I do see people coming to new understandings. Do you see any of that unfolding as well?
I do see a little bit of it. I wish I would see a lot more. I'm very concerned about where we are in humanity right now, because unfortunately what I see is that we are actually on the brink of extinction. There's so much genetic modification that's going on. There is so much damage being done to the environment, to the sky, the water table, the soil, the food. Under those circumstances, I mean, if we don't get the basics of civilization locked down, we will not have a species. Right now, just honestly, during the last several years, the death toll has gone up 40%. That's a serious concern. The birth rate is plummeted. And again, something else that I would stress in relation to this, because I was talking a lot about this before, the 10 basics of civilization. When are we ever going to focus on those? You know, for so many times as we watch the condition on Earth deteriorate, people keep turning to the same things that they turn to in Sumer, which is, you know, what is our leader saying? What is our religion saying? What are the banks saying? Well, I mean, at what point do we focus directly on the 10 basics of civilization and start mastering them ourselves? You know, because as Sutton says in his research, when will this all end? It will only end when people choose voluntary associations and say that, you know what, we don't need help from any other group. We know how to stand on our own. And so we're not going to fight City Hall. We're going to build our own. And, you know, if you want to patronize us, you can do so in vain. You know, we will understand how to stand completely on our own. And I think the only way we do that is by starting to focus directly on the 10 basics of civilization. How can people have their own independent water? How can people have their own 100% independent food? How can they have 100% independent power? How can they have shelters that they can reconstruct themselves so that they would never need any form of insurance? They're so good at they can build whatever they need to build.
Yes, I want to get to that in just a minute. First, I want to go back to the hope that I have for humanity. I had recently a very profound spiritual experience that changed my perspective on everything, and I was shown things that I've been searching for my whole life. And I was shown that we've done this, yes, many thousands of times trying to get it right, but this time something may be different, and we may have hope to get it right. And just based on this one experience, I have more hope than ever. But maybe we should go back before we get into the possibilities of what we could have in the future. Let's go back to Atlantis and remind people about the fall of Atlantis and what really happened during that situation there.
So there are what I call the two paths, the light spiral path and the night spiral path. This is sometimes, you could say, encoded into the Caduceus. Now, in many ways, they'll talk about, for example, in Freemasonry, that there were 33 degrees. Where did the 33 degrees come from? Apparently, it comes from the number of vertebrae in the human spine before birth. So basically, we're talking about what is the quality of energy that is flowing up the spine before it hits the pineal gland. So we can choose a positive path and make all of that energy flow be as positive as possible, or we can choose to channel dark energy up the spine. So when the demigods were presented with the path to enlightenment, apparently they said, no, there's a shortcut way, a path of conquest, a path of power. And this was apparently what was pursued. The details of this are not 100% clear. There's a suggestion that there was a creation of 13 crystal skulls that helped people to tune to darkness. One of these crystal skulls ended up being used by the Maya. It was described as pure evil and that it could kill people upon command of the priest. This may be a device that was related to the fall of Atlantis and its darkness. But what we do know specifically comes right out of Plato. He's telling you right there what was going on. The 10 princes gathered at the capital of Atlantis, went into the temple of Poseidon with bulls. They killed them. They took their blood and they threw it all over the pillars. They burned the bulls completely. They drank their blood. Okay, now in Lewis Spence's work, History of Atlantis, he tells you that he believes strongly, and he has evidence to back it, that the Druids began in Atlantis, that witchcraft began in Atlantis. The full-blown stereotypical witchcraft, the dark robes, the pointy hats, the whole thing. So this is how Atlantis fell. They were seduced by the simplicity of the dark side. I start sounding like George Lucas here. But again, it sounds like the people thought, okay, well, geez, all we have to do is just, kill a lot of animals and deceive people and trick them, and then we can become rulers of everything, right? So that's how easy it is. And it's much simpler on its face than, let's say, learning synergetic geometry and learning engineering and learning all the subtleties of power production and how to create wormholes. That sounded like a huge mental strain. And people were just like, what? Okay, so we can drink and then we can have the wildest sex imaginable, no barriers. We can kill whoever we want. We can have any sensation that we want. This sounds like much more fun. Yeah. So apparently that was the path that the demigods went on. We do know that these sacrifices went on from ancient times. Even when you look into Greek mythology, which isn't necessarily perfectly tracing back to Atlantis, but I would like people to reconsider some of those myths and what they're trying to actually tell you. For example, a god transforming into an animal, and then we have a bunch of women who are collecting flowers. Take a closer look at those flowers. Why? Because a lot of those flowers are narcotics. So a bunch of women taking narcotic flowers, and then they're being sexually assaulted by animal-like beings. And what do we know from the devil dark side? That sometimes people put on animal masks in these rituals, and they attack women who are drugged. Yeah. So think again of what you're being told about the dark side. All of it is really encoded into the myths that are associated with Hades / Dionysus / Bacchus. Okay. Wow. So these groups are part of when Atlanteans went to the dark side. Okay. And we know pretty specifically what went on because those legacies went through time. These were people who were meeting out in the woods. They would take off their clothes. They would, probably practice cannibalism. They were using psychotropic drugs. They were having orgies and, who knows what else they were doing. But a large part of the fall of Atlantis is traced to tuning the soul to darkness and tuning the soul to a path of conquest rather than harmony with nature. So that's largely what the fall of Atlantis is about.
That makes so much sense, man. Now, moving a little bit forward in history, before we get to some solutions, what is your understanding of the New Testament, the story of Jesus, Yeshua, whatever you want to call him? How does that come across for you?
Okay, so I do go extensively into this story in Hidden History of Humanity. Again, I realize that what I'm about to say is going to be extremely controversial and probably upset a number of people.
That's what this show is about, man. Go for it.
Okay, so what I learned is that a number of the figures in religious documents are composite figures. So multiple source material people are merged to form a given character. Moses is an example. He is a conflation of Akhenaten with Ezra, who was a major historical figure who largely gave us the Bible. In the case of Jesus specifically, you have to tie multiple threads together. One of the most essential threads to tie together is the same mystery school in Egypt that I've been referencing this whole time. Pythagoras was a graduate of that school. And the Essenes and the Druids are closely connected. In Bushby's writing, he basically states that the Druids and the Essenes were, for the most part, the same group. So what my research shows is that when Atlantis was falling, the refugees fled from Atlantis, went to several different places. One of those places was up through Ireland and across the Isles to end up in Britain. So the Druids, who were interested in a dark path to power themselves, were sitting there waiting, and then the Sumer civilization gets launched, and then they're asking themselves the question, who's in charge of the world now? So they found out who was in charge, and I believe that the Chaldeans are actually sponsored from the Druids coming south to investigate who was in charge of the world at that point in time. And eventually, these Chaldeans are involved in teaching Abraham in the Bible because he is in the right area, of the Chaldees. So he's learning from the Chaldeans. He's also learning his trades in Egypt. And the Essenes were in that area. And we also know from Akhenaten's work that there was a village close to where Akhenaten's new home city, Amarna, was set up. And that village is called Mal Levi. And this is where the tribe, the Levites, came from. And the Levites were influential in forming the Bible. But the Essenes were a sect of people associated with Jesus. And I tie the Essenes to the Druids. So what happened with Jesus was the original character, the one who's most connected to Jesus, is the Yeshua that you were referencing. He was of the Herodian line. He had a twin brother, Thomas the twin. And these two characters are the forebears of Constantine the Great. And without Constantine the Great, you pretty much don't have Christianity. So at some point in the Council of Nicaea, about 325 AD, Constantine decides to deify his ancestors. And when he does that, he conflates the story of Yeshua with his twin Thomas, along with stories taken from India and the character of Krishna. In Bushby's writing, he states that 346 parallels can be found between tales told of Jesus and tales told of Krishna. Another character who is mixed in to the Jesus character is Apollonius of Tyana, who is also known later as Saint Paul. Saint Paul, Apollonius of Tyana, the same person. Now, again, this is the most controversial probably part of the story. And, again, sorry to have to say this, but my research indicates that the crucifixion story involves the bloodline of Yeshua and Thomas the twin. So they were royalty in the Herodian line that was ruling Judea, that general area. But they were also of the Roman emperor's line. Specifically, the second Roman emperor was Tiberius. And when Joseph of Arimathea, the Joseph of the Bible, of Joseph and Mary, when he was not around, Mariamne Herod, the Mary of the Bible, was impregnated by the second Roman emperor. So this meant that the twins, Yeshua and Thomas, did have a legitimate claim to the Roman throne. And they went after it. More Thomas than Yeshua, because Thomas was a zealot. And when Thomas went after the throne, this was, usurpation of power. The Roman authorities could not possibly accept that. So they decided, okay, there's got to be a crucifixion for this. There's got to be a penalty. You can't just take over power of the Roman Empire. So a crucifixion was scheduled, but there is a rule in ancient Rome that you're allowed to substitute somebody for who's being crucified. And apparently Apollonius of Tyana decides he's going to be the guy to do it. Now, this is the Simon of Cyrene in the Bible, and it's strange, but if you look at Mark, which is probably the most accurate of the four Gospels, it's actually telling you this directly. It's the worst case grammatically of an unclear antecedent in all history. Because if you look carefully at the story of Jesus going up to be crucified, it says that the Simon of Cyrene intervened and decided to carry the cross up the rest of the way. And then it says he was crucified, but it never switched the antecedent back to Jesus. So in other words, Simon of Cyrene took this cross up, and he was the one who was crucified. And apparently he didn't die either. He came down because I have other historical references. There's a site people are welcome to look at. They can see the same evidence that I saw. The site is called Nazareans.com, Nazoreans.com. And it will tell you about Apollonius of Tyana and how he intervened into that situation and was the person who went up on the cross. Now, I think he actually did that because he was a mystery school initiate and he had skills that other people didn't lack. So I think there was a plan that Joseph of Arimathea, who was also a mystery school initiate, I think he understood exactly what this plan was. There's a substance that's referred to in the Bible. It's called myrrh, and it's basically an analgesic, which means that it reduces pain. Everyone in the mystery schools would have known about this. So Joseph of Arimathea would have understood Roman traditions well enough to know the following. You could put somebody up for crucifixion, and if you bribed the right Roman official, you could take them down. So I think Apollonius of Tyana said, okay, this is going to be brutal, but we can do so many things with this if we pull this off. So Apollonius says, I'm going to use my mystery school training. I'm going to load myself up on alcohol. I'm going to load myself up on analgesic myrrh. I'm going to put myself up there on the cross, and you got to get me down after a few hours. And so he goes up and he's taken down when Joseph of Arimathea bribes a guard, and he has to recover. And they say, again, there are sources that say this, for the rest of his life, he had crooked bow legs or something like that from the crucifixion, because it did cause a lot of damage that he couldn't fully recover from. So when you go over the ancient writings, Tony Bushby is extremely comprehensive when he goes over this. He has a book called Crucifixion of Truth. He goes over the founding church fathers, every one of them, Jerome, Irenaeus, all the different people who were closely connected to that time period. And there is not one of them that says that Jesus was crucified. Again, it was Thomas who was the one who was even designated to go up on the cross. It wasn't Yeshua. That Yeshua was not involved in a crucifixion in any way in my research. But again, I realize that I'm one researcher and not everyone's going to agree with me on that. But when you ask me a genuine question, I'm going to give you my honest answer. This is what I've found. And,
No, I love it. It's putting together pieces of the puzzle, man. Everybody's got pieces, and we're all coming together right now and trying to have a better understanding of things. That's why I'm excited about this period. So let's end on natural healing, self-empowerment. Tell us about this.
So after I had created the three-dimensional periodic table of the elements and had that reaction from the scientific community, I was understandably frustrated. I started asking myself questions about the world that I lived in. What kind of world am I living in if you can come up with innovations and they're not acted on, and people are not trying to make the world a better place they could possibly make it as fast as they can? So I started researching global corruption. And eventually that led me to the Kennedy assassination, which is a whole other story. But after that, I went to looking into information that had been suppressed. Suddenly I had new insights of where to look for information that had been suppressed. This led me to one of the most important books I've ever read. It's called Suppressed Inventions and Other Discoveries by Jonathan Eisen, Eisen. And it was not necessarily completely written by him. It was a collection of articles originally published in Nexus magazine out of Australia. A section of that book was devoted to suppressed health information. Got super excited. So I read through all that information, and then I thought, well, this is great. I mean, shoot, we have cures for so many different things now. And then I was thinking, okay, so what do I do with this? And I wasn't quite sure what to do with this. You can get into all kinds of trouble if you do health things, and you're not a doctor. But in any case, I had a friend of mine who was apparently dying. And, he had came to me at one point and said, you can have all my possessions next month because I'm probably going to be dead. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? So he described what his situation was. And I said, hey, you know what? I just finished this book on suppressed healing technologies. We might be able to use some of them. He's just like, okay, go ahead, pick one. So we picked one and it worked. And He was fine, fully recovered. And I thought, okay, that's great. So then I got extra excited and I thought, okay, I'm going to stockpile every piece of suppressed information I can find on healing. So I did that. And then I wrote a book on it, Natural Healing Self-Empowerment. It went through editions. And in the third edition, the one that's only available at my website, I offer a new paradigm of health. And what that paradigm of health is what if we define health positively instead of negatively? Because most of the time when you're having discussions about health, people will say, Well, health is the absence of disease. Well, that's great, but it doesn't really give you something to strive for, does it? Because you don't know
Yes.
exactly what you're going for. So I wanted to define health positively. So eventually, where I was led is that health is flow. Because what I
Mm.
started noticing is that all forms of pathology involve some form of obstruction. You can have an obstruction in your intestines. You can have an obstruction in your liver, your kidneys, your lungs, your lymphatic system, your skin. If you can liberate the body and have perfect flow, you will have ideal health. Basically, what science has shown is that for cells to live eternally, you have to fulfill two basic tasks. The first is you have to give the cell the nutrition that it needs. The second task is to remove its waste. If you can do those two things, the cells will live forever. So what I did in my research was try to learn everything possible about creating optimal nutrition for the cells and optimal ways to remove waste and detoxify the body. And when you do that, you will see that pretty much 99% of all pathology will disappear. All allergies will disappear. I myself have not had the common cold in 20 years. I don't know how many other people can match me on that one. So that's kind of interesting to me. If people are health experts and they can't even beat the common cold, I'm a little suspicious. But beyond that, I have entered the realm of human regeneration. And this is possible. There are a lot of different aspects of regeneration that are possible. Most recently at my website, I have the regeneration of teeth, which I'm very excited about.
Of teeth, you said?
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes. So I was very excited to see that. A little disturbed to find out that some of that information was actually fairly old. What was lacking was mainly that people had made great discoveries, but they hadn't put them all together in the same place. Once I did that, I was able to actually prove to myself by regenerating my own teeth to a certain extent. I'm still working on complete regeneration, but the amount of regeneration that I have seen using the protocol that I've developed is unbelievable. I mean, I never would have thought this would have been possible, but it is. Apparently, it is, and it really has to do with working again in harmony with nature. And it's amazing to me how many people have followed in this path from the 1910 Flexner Report, sponsored by Rockefeller, Carnegie, and a number of other robber barons, to push us down this path of turning away from nature. And one of the great ironies of that is that when the Flexner Report was initiated in 1910, they said they wanted to get rid of quackery, that they wanted to get rid of witchcraft in the schools, okay, because we didn't have anybody practicing witchcraft. So they replaced it with a methodology called pharmacy, which comes from a root word meaning pharmakia, which means witchcraft. So they just got rid of all the witchcraft by replacing it with comprehensive witchcraft. So, I mean, that's just insane to me. The other part of this that frustrates the stuffing out of me is that anyone can look this up. Just, go ahead, do your own research. How are drugs discovered? Because this is what we're told. Drugs are wonderful. Drugs are so great. How are drugs discovered? Well, people look to nature first. And then they find something in nature that works. And then they say, oh, we can't patent this because you're not allowed to patent anything that's in nature. So you have to warp it into something that is not natural. That's the only way you can get a patent. So then they do that on purpose. And the second you do that, you've essentially introduced noise into a system of music and harmony. And so, yes, when you get, are you going to get side effects? Yes, you are. And one of the primary things you're going to damage is the liver. I mean, I don't have to make my case here. Anyone who is, apparently they say that the average person is on at least 4 prescription drugs. Yeah. But you will see that there is liver damage going on all the time. That's because the liver can't handle all these freakish things that it's being asked to work with. And there is a comprehensive evidence chain going back through time, and I show it at my website. And I carry it through one doctor after another, all of whom completely reinforce each other and show you exactly what I'm saying is true. The pathology can be eliminated. It starts with Weston Price, author of Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, goes into Pottinger's cats, goes to Dr. Edward Howell, who wrote Food Enzymes for Health and Longevity, to Joel Wallach, to Dr. Kurt Donsbach and Gary Tunsky, and The Battle for Health is Over pH. And in my view, it's all crowned by my own work, which has new experiments I did as I was learning to do things that no one else had ever done. The research would get you to a certain point and suggest, hey, if you did this experiment, you'd probably have even better results. So I would do that experiment, have those better results, and I report that information in the book. So I've been doing this for many years, and basically the premise behind it is as follows. So far as I know, it's still 100% legal for individuals to go into a grocery store or a health store and buy whatever they want to buy. Okay. So all I'm doing is sharing with you information that can help you make informed choices when you do that. And if you do that, I think you too can see the elimination of all pathology and the regeneration of the human body.
Excellent, man. This is such important and essential information. I'd love to have you back on soon to discuss just this information, because I think this is really important for people, especially right now with the realizations of what they're working with the medical and pharmaceutical industries. So thank you for this, Tim. We'll have to do it again. Before we close out, remind the audience about where they can find all the information about yourself and your work, and I will have those links in the description as well.
Thank you very much for that. My company is Polytope Press. I don't have no idea when I'll get sabotaged again, because I'm getting sabotaged a great deal over the years. But for now, if you go to the Google search engine and type in my company name, Polytope Press, Polytope, followed by Press, I should be the first company that comes up. Hit my website, take a look around. There is a lot of free material there if you don't want to buy anything. Maybe you can just improve your life in some way. I like hearing from people who are improving their lives. It helps give me motivation to go on. So I do hope that people will visit and let me know what they think.
Awesome. Tim, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Like I said, we will definitely be doing this again. And until next time, everyone, have a fantastic evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. We'll see y'all then. Hello, friends. If you or a loved one is struggling with a digestive problem, if you often feel bloated or gassy, experience constipation or loose stools more often than you'd like, maybe you get heartburn and discomfort or pain after meals. If any of these gastrointestinal issues are reducing the quality of your life, get in touch with my friend Christian Yordanov. He's a functional health practitioner and author of 2 health books. He has successfully helped clients with truly severe gut problems. Now we're talking about people who dreaded the thought of their next meal because of all the gas, bloating, distension, and pain they would experience. Many of his clients have had severe gut problems for multiple years, sometimes more than a decade, having received no assistance from the conventional system. Christian uses state-of-the-art lab tests to zero in on your specific imbalances. He designs customized gut restoration and health optimization protocols for each of his clients. He works with clients all around the world and assists them every step of the way with chat support and regular video sessions. He'll help you dial in your diet, cleanse your gut, optimize your meat suit, and show you exactly what you need to do to restore your health and digestive function. So if you're tired of suffering needlessly and want to resolve your gut problems once and for all, click that link in the description to visit Christian's website, book a free intro call with him to discuss your situation, and make sure to mention FKN at the time of booking. He's going to add extra consultation sessions to your package. So book that call and fix your gut.